Okay, so this is a response to a response to a response. I think I got that right. So a while back I made a video, All Religions Are the Same, where I argued that Christianity stands alone and is unique. Another proof that Christianity is true. So I had a response to that by an atheist YouTuber whose channel is called Blue Collar Heathen. And he critiqued everything I said, and then I responded to that. I think I called it Evidence for an Atheist. Then that video he recently responded to. So the first time when I responded, I was going by what my son said the video said. This time my son actually showed me both videos. So first off, to get you familiar with Blue Collar Heathen, he's an atheist. He's blue collar. In fact, his video he said he was a paramedic, which gets my respect. I've known a couple paramedics and they're both stand-up guys. I mean, just think about it. The job they do, you can't be a selfish jerk to do that kind. You got to care about people. So right off the bat, tells me he's a good guy. Plus he's blue collar. Plus paramedics are probably the only guys that work more crazier hours than I do. So I give him props for that. He definitely earned my respect. He's a hard-working blue collar guy. Cares about people. Actually kind of reminds me of someone I would have hung out with back in Jersey, growing up on the streets of Irvington and Newark. Maybe like one of my smart friends who could have been a doctor if he had the right breaks and he wasn't too busy getting in trouble with me. Kind of reminds me of that. And I would just like to say, you know, I would go as far as to say, you're my blue collar brother from another mother. You know my mother's name, but I don't know your mother's name. Just saying. So, with all that aside, I just want to give you a scripture verse, which I know you're an atheist and you don't think it's inspired by God, but I think you'll agree with this verse. It's in Proverbs. It says, "Men sharpen men like iron sharpens iron." And your critiques, Blue Collar Heathen, made me dive deeper and sharpen my blade. And I think we got it narrowed down to one argument, which I'm going to address today in just a moment. But when I say sharpen my blade, it's like we get rusty, you know, when we don't use our blade. And kind of give you a martial arts metaphor. Back in the day, in the 80s, I was reading about Gracie JiuJitsu. This is when Taekwondo and Karate was all the rage. No one knew about how awesome Judo was, how awesome wrestling was. But the Gracie family knew, and they took that, and then they even took it to the next level and created the art of Gracie JiuJitsu. So I mean, back before the first UFC, I was training with these guys, and learned a lot of stuff because growing up in Irvington and Newark, I've had so many, you know, dozens and dozens, literally dozens and dozens of street fights. And from my experience, I knew that most fights ended up on the ground. So if you were an expert ground fighter, you had an edge over your opponent. So that's why I was attracted to that style of fighting. However, being a blue collar man with 5 kids, I wasn't able to stick with it, and I didn't even get a belt. You know, I just, whenever I got a chance, I'd drop into these classes. But over the years, an MMA school would open up, and I would drop in for a while, you know, when my schedule allowed it, and then I'd have to drop out and, you know, take care of the family and take care of business. But one thing I learned was every time I went back, there was a lot of rust, physical rust, that you know, your cardio is worse, your physical strength is down. So you had to sharpen your blade, you had to get rid of the rust. And also another thing I noticed is the sport evolved. Jiu-Jitsu evolved, like, you know, stuff that we thought was high tech back then was just basic jiu-jitsu now, you know. So anyway, so I thank you, Blue Collar Heathen, because you know, sometimes, you know, when I first became a Christian, I really studied. I was a skeptic as well, and so I questioned everything. And then you just kind of take it, you know, take your faith for granted until you're challenged, and you actually challenged me. You gave me a really good argument, and I'm going to address it. So the argument, what we narrowed it down to was, okay, sure, the New Testament is reliable historical documents. And Blue Collar Heathen agreed that the translation stayed the same. So we could look back, you know, at documents from over 1,000 years ago, and they didn't lose anything in translation. In fact, I think it's like 99% accurate, as a, which is enormous, is huge in historical terms. But his argument was a good one. It's like, okay, just because the translation is accurate, how do we know the content is true? And I could totally get that, because I'm a bit of a health nut, and my mom's always telling me I waste my money on organic vegetables and organic coffee. She said, I read, they did a test, and organic vegetables don't have any more vitamins than regular vegetables. And I said, Mom, that's just a red herring, just something to throw out there to distract you. I'm not eating it because I think I'm getting more vitamins. I'm not eating it for what I think I'm getting. I'm eating it for what I'm not getting. I'm not getting all the pesticides that, that are bad for you. And especially coffee. I mean, most coffee we get from third world countries, and they put pesticides that are banned in America. Never mind the pesticides that we're allowed to use in America that are bad for you. So I really try and get organic coffee. That's, that's one drink that's really tastes good, gives you energy, and it detoxifies your liver. I mean, what an awesome drink coffee is. But if you load it with pesticides, you're playing Russian roulette with your health there. So anyway, so I see what he's saying. It's a red herring. Okay, yeah, so sure, you can look at something that was written, that we have dated maybe 200 AD, and it's going to match what we have today, 99%. And the 1% is just like words that don't matter, like the or words that don't change the subject matter. So we really narrowed it down, and we got to the point where, how do you know it's true? And when he's saying that, he's alluding to the miracles. And the one thing that makes or breaks Christianity is the resurrection. And he said, how do you know Jesus rose from the dead? He said, we didn't understand death like we do now, maybe 2,000 years ago. And other people will allude to maybe it was a trick. Maybe the disciples took the body and hid it. So I'm going to address those arguments now. So first of all, scholars, and I mentioned a few in my last video, so I'm not going to take this video on forever and ever and give you statistics and scholars. You can look this up, or you can look at some of my other videos where I give names and sources. So scholars, historian scholars, will look at the genre of the document they're reading. So like, for example, the proverb I just gave you is wisdom literature. That's the genre of the book of Proverbs. The book of Psalms would be poetic. The genre would be poetic literature. And many scholars think the book of Genesis is like an analogies. Like it's not not a historical account of creation, although it gets the main points by using analogy. So God may not have made the world in 7 days, but he made the world. Okay, God may have done things differently, but the book of Genesis was just to say God made everything. So depends on the genre. And some fundamentalist Christians will argue that, say no, it's word for word. But most intelligent Christians and scholars will say there's different genres, and you have to understand the genre it was written. Excuse me. But the genre of the Gospels are considered historical accounts. In fact, Luke, who was a physician, in his Gospel said this is an orderly account. And then plenty times in Luke where he refers to historical things happening, archaeologists have discovered that, yeah, he was right. When in fact, for years they thought he was, it must not be accurate because Luke said this and this place don't exist. If you want to do a biblical archaeologist research, there's many biblical archaeologists that can validate what Luke's saying. Luke's book is historically accurate. Okay? And getting back to the reliability, kind of jumped ahead, getting back to the reliability of the New Testament for those who maybe not seen that last video I did on this subject. The closer you get to the event, the more historically accurate it is. Like, for example, the book of Mark was written in 60 AD. 30 years after the death of Jesus. Okay? The closest we have, the closest biographers of Alexander the Great were written 400 years after Alexander the Great had died. And I think this guy named Plutarch. And, I got a note for this stuff I'm not up on. Yeah, Plutarch. Yeah, I forget. One of the guys' name was Plutarch and Arian. Plutarch and Arian. These guys are the first biographers. So that's the first. It's the oldest account we got is 400 years after Alexander the Great, and no historian would deny that Alexander the Great died the way they said. They consider it very reliable. So now we got Mark writing 60 AD, 30 years after Jesus' death. So very reliable in that sense. Also, the amount of manuscripts. I had mentioned there was 5,000 New Testament manuscripts, and Blue Collar Heathen corrected me and said, no, there's 5,800. Thank you. And that's like incredible compared to any historical documents. I had mentioned Iliad was the second most reliable source, and that had like 600 copies, manuscripts. So the reliability of New Testament is there. Just is what the New Testament is saying true? And again, the genre of the Gospels is considered historical genre. And just think about this for a minute. When they gave the account in the New Testament of finding the empty tomb, they said Mary, Mary Magdalene, and then Mary, the mother of James, discovered the tomb empty. Now, 2,000 years ago, a woman's account wasn't considered valid. You know, women were, like, in that culture, women, unfortunately, until Christianity brought them to a level equal to men. You can see my video, Why All Feminists Should Be Christians. But that's, you know, I won't dive too much into that. But at that time, the culture in the Middle East and around the world was women were second-class citizens. So if you wanted to make up a story, the last thing you would say is that, oh, these two women found the empty tomb. You know, you would give two, like, prominent men to make your argument more valid. Then also, his argument was, well, maybe they didn't understand death. Maybe he really wasn't dead. Well, the historical account was Joseph of Arimathea, I believe it was, asked to prepare the body for death. So, you know, once they put all the stuff they put on it and wrap it up, if he wasn't dead, he'll be dead by the time they're done. Then he was put into a tomb, and the Jews were afraid that the Christians would move the body, so they asked the Romans to guard the tomb. So they put a huge, like 400-pound stone in front of the tomb, and the Roman soldiers were guarding the tomb. Now, Roman soldiers were the most disciplined soldiers ever. They're like the Marine Recon or the Marine Raiders on steroids. You know, they're not going to fall asleep because the punishment for sleep is you don't wake up. If they caught you sleeping, they would just kill you while you were sleeping. You wouldn't wake up. Okay? I believe the Chinese government has the same rule. If you fall asleep, they just put a bullet in your head if you fall asleep on guard duty today. So they're not going to fall asleep. But it says the angel put him to sleep, and 3 days later, the tomb rolled, and out comes Jesus. So these are the historical arguments. The only argument against that would be, well, that's supernatural. That's a miracle. They don't exist. That's where the problem is. The problem isn't with the historical accuracy of the stories. The problem is you don't believe in miracles. And then again, after that, I referred to my last video that Paul said 500 people seen him, and they're still alive today. So basically, he was telling the people that day, if you don't believe me, ask these 500 people that seen him the same day he rose. So he was putting himself out there to look like a liar or an idiot. You know, he's like, and that again is historical accurate documents. And a lot of people say, well, that's only in the New Testament. But you know, the New Testament is a collection of letters or historical documents. Just because 400 later the Catholic Church put all these historical documents into a book and called it the New Testament doesn't make these documents less historical. You see what I'm saying? So according to the historical record, 500 people seen Jesus after he died. And they went to their death. People don't go to their death for a lie. I mean, they got thrown to lions. They got crucified. They got the most excruciating deaths because they were saying Jesus was alive. They've seen it with their own 2 eyes. So your only argument is it can't be a miracle because you've never seen any miracles. You know, I grew up in the inner city. I'd never seen a baby squirrel, but I knew they existed because I seen the mama and dad squirrels. You know what I'm saying? So just because you haven't experienced a miracle doesn't mean miracles don't exist. And if you keep watching my videos, I plan on making a video about miracles and giving you authentic proof. I'm going to give you proof of miracles. Now, I have miracles in my own life I'm going to share with you, but you can say, oh, I don't believe you. And that's fair enough. I can't prove it. I can just tell you my experience. Plenty of miracles. Like, that'll blow your mind if you believe me, but you probably won't believe me. If you don't believe in miracles, that is. But I'm going to give you documented miracles. And then it's up to you to make the choice. You know, we have free will. And, you know, if God is true, I pray. I'm sorry. If you want to know the truth, you should pray. God, if you're true, reveal yourself to me. And you'd be surprised, you know. And then you're going to have to make the choice. Is this real or is this just a head game? So, again, for my subscribers, he's called Blue Collar Heathen. I would check out his video. I don't agree with his philosophy and his worldview, but he seems like a good guy. Like I said, he's a paramedic. In my view, that's a stand-up guy. He's smart, and he gives good arguments for his position. And as Catholics, we know that faith and reason are not opposed. They go hand in hand. And faith and science go hand in hand. So see what your opposition has to argue and sharpen your blade to fight back. So God bless, and looking forward to your next video. See you. Bye.